This episode of my prison bus conversion series begins at the steel yard, where I picked up a 4x8 sheet of 18 gauge sheet metal. What do you think about that trip to the steel yard? That was pretty good. Alright, now the plan for the sheet metal is to cover over a few of the windows on the driver's side of the bus. And those are windows where I've got like a shower and some cupboards and things like that. And the windows are just totally kind of obsolete. And covering them over seemed to make sense. If you ever walked with sheet metal, it's kind of like being drunk or something. It's kind of a weird experience as that stuff wiggles around. I definitely wouldn't want to carry 2 sheets of it at a time. One was plenty. All right, so this job is happening over on this driver's side of the bus. I had to identify a couple of rivets, like 7 or 8 rivets along the top to knock out. And I just went kind of primitive here. This whole episode of the conversion series could be called the hand tool edition because I just went at this with hand tools and it worked pretty well. And just so you can see them up close, the tools I'm using on this job are a big old heavy masonry hammer, a somewhat smaller hammer, a large 14-inch cat's paw, cold chisel, and a punch. Alright, so back over at the sheet metal, I just needed to cut this sheet down. Like I said, it was 4x8. I only needed a piece that was about 30 inches by, I forget, somewhere like 83 inches, something like that. So I snapped a chalk line and then got out my shears, my metal shears. And I used those just because I wanted to get a really nice clean cut on the sheet metal. And I put a little short video on my Instagram account. If you don't follow me on Instagram and you're over there, my name is Meta Spencer, and you can find me there as well as on Facebook and Patreon and pretty much everywhere else online. And I cleaned up the sheet metal so I could put some primer on it. This can of primer I found in a free pile on the side of the road a while back. A general purpose primer. It didn't need to be fancy because this prime side is going to go on the inside. I just wanted to put a little primer on there to inhibit any chance of rust. And following along with the hand tool edition, I cut a couple of old 2x4s. You'll see these are pretty essential. If you're going to hang sheet metal on the side of your prison bus, you're going to need a couple of old 2x4s. Alright, so here's the plan for getting the sheet metal in place. One side is prime, that's going to be the back side, so I just need to prime the front side and it should be all set. I'm going to walk up the ladder, kind of like holding the sheet metal, and then I'll set it on top of those 2x4s. Then I should be able to kind of kick those guys a little bit as the sheet metal is sliding in place. Up above, as you probably saw, I took out the rivets on that kind of overlapping drip rail, rain drip rail, whatever it is, and the sheet metal is going to slide up in there. If I need to, I'm going to jack those 2x4s, put a jack on them just to really cram that stuff up in there, but I might be able to just pull it up in place. I'm just going to ease the gaps up top just to give it a little bit of room so it'll slide up in there. It's 18 gauge, so not very thick, like a 1/16 of an inch, 32nd of an inch, something like that. Not too thick, but at current rates, you couldn't slide a piece of paper up in there, so I just need to ease those. And with a somewhat nicer spray paint, I primed the other side, and it was about 50 degrees out, 55 degrees, and that primer just dried pretty quickly. So 20-30 minutes later, it was not tacky, and I could go ahead and put the sheet metal in place. Now, before actually riveting it in place, I did want to put some sealant on there, and this is a Sikaflex, I think it's called. And I kind of sanded the paint just a little bit, put a couple beads of Sikaflex on the sides, and went ahead with my so-called plan to put the sheet metal up using those 2x4s. Yeah, you probably could have seen that one coming. Anyway, second time was a charm. There's this old saying that I've been kind of thinking about lately, which is that if you want to build a house, you build the first for a stranger, the second for a friend, and the third for yourself. And this prison bus conversion has been making me think about that saying, just because, the first time through sometimes is a little bit rough. But I feel like I did ultimately get this dialed in.
Looks good. Seems like it's in place, so next thing to do is drop some rivets up top, and then I'm going to rivet down the sides where the Sikaflex is and seal it up.
Now, I talked to Melissa about this job, and I was asking her if she thought I should sheet metal over a couple windows on the other side. And I think what she said was something like, it depends on how Mad Max you want the bus to look. And I've been thinking about that. It does look a little Mad Max right now, but I think with some paint, it's going to sort of blend in. We'll have to see.
All right, now this guy, as far as I'm concerned, is just about done except for paint, which obviously is going to come later when I paint the bus. But the last thing I want to do is I just want to put a couple rivets along the bottom. My logic here in the way I did this sort of follows the way that I install windows. To go for a seal along the top, and this one has the drip edge, so that's good. Seal along the top, seal along the sides, and then leave the bottom unsealed so any water in there can drip out. Remember, this is over windows that are already sealed and not leaking and in good shape. So it's really kind of like a second layer. I don't want this thing to be watertight on the bottom. Instead, any moisture, condensation, water in there, whatever, I want it to be able to drip out. So I'm just going to put a couple rivets on the bottom just so that the whole thing doesn't wiggle at all, but that's it.
All right, now I did get after a couple other jobs this week. One was to create a steam bender to bend some wood trim to hopefully trim up the arcs at the top of my walls inside the bus. So here's a look at the steam bender, and it actually worked really well. I pulled a couple pieces of trim out of there and got to bending them. The problem came in with the arc itself. So you can see it worked okay. Like I got into like there, but then I started twisting and stuff. So I just don't think it's gonna be perfect. The thing is, I need this damn angle right here to happen. So I don't think bent wood is necessarily gonna be the way to go. And at this point, my microphone on my camera completely died. So what I'm saying here is something about needing to tune up the bathroom door. And I'm just going to try to work my way through this soundless video.
by just kind of telling you what I was thinking at the time, and I might even make a few sound effects. I don't know, we'll see. Basically the idea here is that the door closes really nicely on one side, but over here I've got this gap, like a serious gap. And my first thought was to frame a wall, but really I just needed a couple of 3/4 inch boards to kind of trim it out because it's a pretty small gap. So I cut down one of those boards with this sort of slot here, you'll see, just so it would fit in place. And Millie has been in a cone for the last couple days. She cut her foot and she's still getting around pretty well. All right, back in the bus, I installed that baby, and actually this was kind of a dry run. I wasn't sure if it was gonna work out, but I thought it looked pretty good. A little bit more trim and it's gonna look even better. All right, back in the bus, I thought it was looking pretty good, and I got out my nailer, but the cold weather kind of killed the battery. So again, back to hand tools, they will never fail you. I just hammered in some finished nails and got that piece in place. The next thing to do was to kind of put a backer board on there. That door needed something to kick against on the inside. And I just used some more of that 3/4 inch pine, just some white pine, and got it in a pretty good spot. The next thing to do, I was talking about here, was to install a push button catch. And I put one up on top. I might put one more down below, but I haven't done that yet. The push button catch will allow the door to just kind of close but not latch in place, and I'll show you why I'm using that push button catch method in a minute. All right, so it's catching up top there, and that's pretty nice, but the door needs to swing open and also catch in the hallway. So I put another kick plate, I guess it was, or latch strike plate in the hallway, and that way the door could close in the hallway and close shut right there. So pretty good situation. Next thing I needed was just a latch so that when this baby is on the road, you can really lock the bathroom door shut. I guess you could also lock it shut on people if they decided to go in there. Okay, Tink decided to help out for this part of the job. The door just needed a couple handles, and I didn't put a knob on here because I was using those push button catches, but just a couple of simple handles that I had in my stash, one on the inside and one on the outside. And check it out, my microphone actually started working again. And then there's a handle over here, and there are no screws or whatever. I just kind of like how that looks. All right, so bathroom door I think is complete. Oh, all right, thanks for checking out this hand tools edition of the prison bus conversion project. I think the bus is coming along pretty well. Go do something cool, and I'm gonna see you in my next build video.